Episode 14, Disco versus Acid Jazz. This episode is dedicated to all LP mixers and Ableton Live users out there. Disco versus Acid Jazz. Which genre has more staying power? I can't recall who asked me this question. It's stuck in my mind since 1996. Because back around Christmas time of 1996, I discovered the song Cosmic Girl by Jamiroquai. My first impression of the song was, this is disco with 90s technology. Let's compare the two. Disco, and this is based on notes from masterclass.com. It's basically defined as upbeat dance music in dance clubs and also discotheques, primarily American origin, although Europe had its Eurodisco as a variation in the 1970s and 80s. Generally, the music is in 4/4 time with a beat for every, so it's basically four beats every single time, doot, 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 which means drummers out there, if you want to learn how to play drums, I would recommend disco music first to practice the standard patterns, if you will, and then go on and then from there, if you're interested and you get better at mastering disco music, go listen to John Bonham on the album Led Zeppelin 4, especially the song called When the Levee Breaks. It also has guitars that's used primarily for the chicken scratch noise or the waka waka with the wah pedal. A variety of instruments. You're going to hear a variety of instruments ranging anywhere between strings, electric, to acoustic, to horns, even a flute. This is probably why a studio production of disco music was so expensive compared to guitar player, bass player, another bass guitar player, singer, and a drummer like Kiss, who got their start thanks to Casablanca Records. Casablanca Records also being famous for a whole bunch of other disco albums. DJs ended up using 2 LPs of the same songs to do loops at discotheques. Think about it. If LPs were, if you only have this much space on an LP, then there's only so much time you could record on this so for recording one song on an LP. So how do you extend the same song? You basically take two of the same LPs and just basically loop them together. It's a great question to ask Run DMC regarding how they do it. Think about the LP scratch sound. Oh, the poor vinyl. Oh, the poor vinyl. There were 3 central themes covered in the disco genre: love, encouragement, and also dance instructions. Disco ended up having other offshoots come from it, such as Eurodisco, as previously mentioned, Italo disco, as well as space disco. It was a 1970s time frame. When you look at the 1970s, you have a bunch of other movements, hippie movements, Kiss, for example. But then this music originally got popular because it catered to the minority crowd. We're talking Latinos, blacks, as well as the LGB crowd, if you will. And if you don't believe me, look up a movie called Studio 54 with Mike Myers, Ryan Gosling, and Neve Campbell, as well as Salma back then, Hayek. Saturday Night Fever, the movie, it helped make the genre mainstream. Think about the band, the Bee Gees Anything, as well as Walter Murphy with The Fifth of Beethoven. Sadly, Disco Sucks movement, thanks to Steve Dahl, it ended up destroying the Bee Gees' ability to repeat their Saturday Night Fever soundtrack successes. And to this day, the music, it lives on in mainstream weddings. Go to an American wedding, and if you didn't hear the Village People with YMCA yet, just give it some time. And also some other performance artists, such as Amazing Christopher the Puppet Man, heavily incorporates disco music into his repertoire. Popular musicians from this time period, from the 70s and 80s onward, you got Donna Summer, Bad Girls, made popular again by Jamiroquai, The Village People, a creation. It was a band created by 2 French people, Jacques Morali and Henry Belolo. The Bee Gees, Casey and the Sunshine Band, the Boogie Shoes song, Cool Again, Jungle Boogie. Gloria Gaynor, I Will Survive. Now, here's an interesting thing about Gloria Gaynor. She wasn't having much success, but with this song, I Will Survive, DJ Richie Koczor was able to take the song and just make it very popular for the disco crowd in discotheques in America. And speaking of dance instructions, Do the Hustle. Yes, that's right, Do the Hustle. Van McCoy. You got ABBA, a Swedish band who decided to get in on this disco action as disco was starting to become more mainstream. Think about the songs Waterloo as well. Yes, that's right, Dancing Queen. Even Michael Jackson got into this action with the song Rock With You. The video is awesome. And then in the early 80s, you had Rick James with the song Super Freak, which was resampled by MC Hammer and also remade by Alexander Misko. Okay, all right. The minor scale traditionally is not a traditional jazz scale, if you will, but the song, it has a tenor saxophone in it. Blow Daddy! Let's look at acid jazz. Also, thanks to the notes from masterclass.com, it really is an offshoot of jazz, funk, and electronic dance music. It's British in origin. There was a French DJ Gilles Peterson. He basically started the Acid Jazz Records company in London, I think, in 1988. By the way, he does speak English, but he's technically a French citizen, last I recall. Then he also started another company called Talkin' Loud Records in 1990. This style of music, it has 4 traits. Rare groove sampling, which is basically taking samples of unusual or offbeat or unknown jazz tunes and incorporating it into a loop in the music. You also have traditional jazz elements such as odd chords. So let's see, minor 7s, 9s, A suspended 4s, for example. You also have a little bit of improvisation, unlike normal jazz, because jazz is primarily about improvisation, innovation, musically speaking. And it's hard to hear it, but you do hear some improvisation compared to disco. In this style of music, it gets a lot of input from hip hop and funk. And in the late 1980s, it just got very, very popular. And then it faded out as far as popularity goes after the late 1990s. Some of the prominent musicians who did acid jazz really well, you got Jamiroquai. Jamiroquai, the name per Jay Kai's admission, is a portmanteau of jam and Iroquois. Iroquois put together. He's a dude with the funny hats, by the way. You got Us Three, famous for the song Cantaloupe/Flip Fantasia. By the way, the band's name, it was inspired by a jazz musician's Horace Parlan's Us Three album. You also have the Brand New Heavies with the song Never Stop. And you also have Stereo MCs. Well, they're technically a rap group, but when you look at their song Connected, the song does use a saxophone, which is a jazz type of an instrument thanks to a Belgian guy, Adolphe Sax. Then you also have Lips Inc. I think they were from Minnesota. Famous for the song Funky Town, also featured in the movie History of the World Part 1 in the Roman scene with Gregory Hines. What are the similarities between these two styles here? The 4/4 time is the predominant time signature for these two genres. So therefore, no love for Peter Gabriel's Salisbury Hill and the 7/4 time. You have a variety of instruments being present in the recording and also the live production of the music as a whole. So this means live performances could get very expensive unless everyone uses Ableton Live. So this means if Frank Zappa was still alive today and had access to Ableton Live, he probably could produce Peaches in Regalia the way he wanted to without having to spend a fortune on all the specialty musicians. And by the way, that's disco and acid jazz, they both use DJs. What are some of the differences? Disco after it became more mainstream in the 70s, as well as in the 80s, you had a lot more studio production micromanagement where you essentially had a producer who basically decided this is how it's going to be, and that's how it was, period. Whereas for acid jazz, you may have a recording being done one way, but when when these bands go out to do tours, you don't. Let's see, they have a little bit of improvisations here and there. And for an example of this, look for a song called "Bad Girls," recorded by Jay Kai and his Jamiroquai band. And if you want more of a stark comparison between the two styles, watch Village People compared to Jamiroquai's Live at Verona performance. Disco is more about dance. It's about the dance, getting people out on the floor to basically do the hustle and so forth. Slide to the left, slide to the right, for example. Whereas acid jazz tends to bleed more into the hypnotic background music. And here's an example. Go to a wedding. You'll find more disco music than you will acid jazz music. Whereas prior to 2013, September 5th, 2013, if you were to go to South End Boston on Appleton Street, look for a martini bar called 28 Degrees. You walk in there, and it's acid jazz everywhere. Disco became so popular to the point you had Saturday Night Fever, whereas with acid jazz, yes, okay, I got nothing. So in conclusion, disco is easier to follow and dance to, but acid jazz, style-wise, has more artistic freedom to give people the ability to improvise and also adapt disco music for the acid jazz audience, such as Jamiroquai and its interpretation of Bad Girls. All right, here's the Kevin Bacon game. From disco, DJs mixing LPs, Run DMC, Rick Rubin, to Aerosmith yielding Walk This Way in 1986. With 4 degrees of separation, that means Aerosmith is way overdue to make a disco album. Thank you. Until next time.